Hi, and welcome to Ben's Business Podcast, episode number 64. We're here today with my special guest, David Burkus. David Burkus is a best-selling author, a sought-after speaker, and associate professor of leadership and innovation at Oral Roberts University. The author, new book out called Friend of a Friend, which is all about networking and how to grow your network and build key connections, and all based on science and human behavior. I would like to ask you more about that. It's not just another book about networking. It's really a whole different approach, which has really changed my mindset around networking. And I've been reading the book myself, and I'm really excited to implement some of the stuff and learn more today. You've delivered keynote speeches to leaders of Fortune 500 companies. His TEDx talk has almost reached 2 million views. It's at 1.9 million views just now. It's so close that I was hoping we could maybe delay this interview until it hit over the 2 million mark, but here we go. And you're also a regular contributor to the Harvard Business Review. So very impressive.
Well, thanks. Yeah, we're so close on that. But you know what? We have delayed doing this interview long enough, and I don't think it's worth delaying it anymore.
Yes.
2 million. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, welcome to the show. And we did have a lot of technical errors. We're meant to be live right now on Facebook, but instead we're doing it through a Zoom recording, which is kind of a compromise. But I think we really had to do something to make this happen and take some kind of compromise, because something was blocking us in the universe to make this happen.
If you're watching this, I hope that this is going to be worth the frustration. You're watching this easily, but I think I rescheduled on you once, you did on me once, then even today we were supposed to go live at 2, and then apparently not the entire world is synced up in daylight savings time, or summertime. So we flipped, so I had the total time wrong, and just, it's been, and then we rescheduled for 4, and Facebook decided it hated us, and so the universe, Mark Zuckerberg, everyone is conspiring to get you to not hear this talk, which means you're going to want to watch.
Yes. And I have a theory as well, that because I've started a challenge, which is using Facebook Live daily. So I've been doing Facebook Lives every single day to promote a workshop that I'm launching in Edinburgh. And I think that Facebook have decided I'm not allowed to use that much hosting space on their platform. They've just blocked me.
It could be. It could be. People love your content, but unfortunately, it's just taking up too much server space. Could be.
So there's a lot of factors it could be. So the first question I have for you, David, is what caused you to write a book on networking with this unique approach? Was it a particular problem that you were trying to fix, that you've seen a problem within the networking industry, or is this kind of approach to networking just come natural to you? Maybe you could explain what the book is up front, and then go ahead and answer that question.
Certainly not natural to me. I'll start with that. So the idea of the book, the whole idea behind Friend of a Friend, is that the world does not need another networking advice book. There's been several published since Friend of a Friend came out, so apparently no one's listening to me about the fact that we don't need more of them, right? Because most of them are largely the same thing. Most of them are actually a memoir, right? Advice books are actually autobiographical. Most of them are, here's what I did. I think I have a great network, so if you just do what I did, it'll work great for you. Which is fine if you're in a similar industry, if you're a similar age and a similar personality as that person. But I think everybody that's ever read one of these sort of advice books, maybe you walk away with one thing you can apply, and the rest just seems like, I would never do that. I would never, that just freaks me out, right? Or you try and apply all of the advice. So like you go to that networking event and then you try and do that, and then you feel weird and sleazy and inauthentic. And like, of course you feel inauthentic because you're literally pretending to be someone else when you're trying to take that person's lived experience and replicate it in your life. No wonder it doesn't work, right? So part of it was that problem, that we needed kind of this different approach. The other thing, quite frankly, was that my background's in organizational psychology and in studying teams at work and that sort of thing, creative teams, but also just sort of how work gets done in organizations. And one of the things that field butts up against is this world of network science. So I've written about studies from this world network science in my prior two books and got really fascinated by it. And that sort of looking at the networking advice problem, I'm kind of fascinated with a couple of these different studies. And that's when it sort of occurs to me that like, okay, well, maybe what the world needs is not another book of advice, but a book on here's how networks work. And there have been books that survey the insights from the world of network science, but they're textbooks. They're not really taking that leap to go, okay, well, if this is universally true about all networks and all cultures and all industries, then it's true for what your situation too. Here's how to apply it. Nobody had done that, sort of taken that leap yet. And so that became the big goal. What if we did a book that would teach people how to understand the network around them so that they could develop a plan to fix their weaknesses and build on their strengths inside of what their own existing network looks like.
Right. Okay. So that was going to be the next question, kind of. Yeah, you kind of answered one of the questions. So the other thing is networking events important? So I've heard you talk about I listened to a lot of the podcasts before this one, before we came on, and I heard you talking about mixed networking events and the difference in other options of networking with people. So are these kind of mixed networking events still important in any way?
Yeah, it depends on what your goals are, right? I think one of the challenges with meetups, with networking events, with mixers, with the cocktail party that happens after the conference, those sort of things, they're huge unstructured blocks of time. And most of us go into those events thinking that, okay, it's a huge unstructured block of time, so the goal should be to use that time to meet lots of new people, because presumably your appointments are with people that you already meet and that sort of thing. The problem is human nature being what it is, we spend most of our time at these unstructured networking events with people we already know. I mean, we know this from several different studies, one of which, one of my favorite studies in the book, literally attached an RFID chip to everyone's name tag so that it could track who is talking to whom throughout this hour of a networking mixer. Right. And what they found was that people, despite the goal being to meet new people, people spent way more of their time, 2/3 of their time, with people that they already knew. And it's subtle, but it's a human nature thing. Like, we just linger longer in conversations with people that we know, and then suddenly, where did the time go, right? Mm-hmm. So what I say is that actually if you go in with the goal that this event, the purpose of this unstructured networking event is actually to reconnect with people we've met before, right? So what I call sort of your weak and dormant ties, then these events can be really, really useful. But if your goal is to meet new people, it's probably not going to happen at the level that you want. You need to be looking at other events. What are in the book we call shared activities, things where there's a goal other than just meeting people. That's the reason we came up. And this is everything from, hobbies to sports leagues to volunteering for a charity. One of the favorite examples that I give in the book is a friend of mine who throws dinner parties where people are actually involved in the cooking of dinner too. So then it's not just conversation. There's a goal, which is producing this meal for the other 11 people in the room. Mm-hmm. And you just build, what we know from human behavior research is that you build a stronger tie with someone in those situations, because in order to achieve the objective, you have to get along. And so people drop their script, they drop their elevator pitch, they drop all that stuff that we hate from networking events, and they just talk, right? And you end up building a better connection with people when you engage in these shared activities. So networking events, they're not, you can't, I mean, if you wanted to skip them for the rest of your life, you could probably get away with it. But there is a purpose, which is know who else is going to be there ahead of time, and use it to reconnect with people you already know. If you're trying to grow the number of people you know, there are better activities. These shared activities are a better way to do it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I read an article about how someone's basically not going to return to networking ever again for that kind of reason, because they're going to just develop the connections that they've already built up from networking. They've built up all that, like the Rolodex of cards and people's contact details over time. And now they're kind of publishing they've quit networking, they've not attended one again. And I thought that was quite an interesting statement. And I guess I've kind of did the same unconsciously. I just decided it wasn't really working for my business as much. And I took a different approach to it. So yeah, that's interesting. So knowing who is going to be there is kind of, you could easily just arrange a secret meeting with those people you want to meet instead of going to this networking event with lots of people you don't want to see.
Yeah. I mean, yes. I think we all need a little bit of room for serendipity in our lives. But yes, I mean, one of the things that I'll do, like at a conference, for example, I don't rely on that cocktail hour to meet new people. When I know who's there, like if I see you in the hallway and we're both going to different sessions at a conference or something like that, I may grab you for a second and go, Ben, I really want to reconnect with you. Can we chat during the cocktail hour? Like I'll make that plan in that moment, that later in the day, when we're in this unstructured block of time, let's use that. Or, I mean, if it's a bigger conference, like there's several events I go to throughout the year where I know the cast of characters is going to be there. And about 6 or 8 weeks out, I'll actually start emailing them and going, hey, I'm looking forward to seeing you at this event. I know, we're headed there. Let's make a point to sit down for a little bit and reconnect. And even those little emails are sort of a signal that when we get to this unstructured time, that's usually where people fill it in, right? I mean, lunches and dinners fill up fast, right? So people can't say, yeah, let's grab a bite, or nobody can really grab coffee because there's supposed to be a session going on or that sort of thing. So these unstructured hours, that's when those little meetings happen. And I think that's a better use of time. Now you will find that as I reconnect, like, oh, Ben, we haven't talked in 6 months, let's reconnect. Someone will come along and chat with you, and I'll sort of organically meet new people, even though I'm talking to people that I already know. And that's actually how most of us make our new connections anyway. I mean, the reason the book is called Friend of a Friend is that's the primary driver of how all of us grow our connections. That's what naturally happens. And so, my argument is if you're only defining networking events, networking is going to these networking events, then if you want to skip that and never do it again in the rest of your life, great. I will tell you, you're going to meet new people. You're going to meet them because they're friends of your existing friends. And so as long as you sort of lean into that, you can do the same thing. We just have to, there's a couple warnings in the book and things we got to be deliberate about if you're going to go that route. But that's a very effective route too. And even myself, that's the route that I take most of the time. Even if I'm at one of those unstructured events, if I meet someone, it's usually because we have a mutual friend in common, and that's what triggers the conversation.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I also, this is a question on top of that about, you mentioned in your book it was the top networker in Silicon Valley, and I really like that. I related to that story and some of the guys' advice and tips on how to network properly. And I went and read the article that you referred to from the book as well, and he suggested that you want to network with people who you want to influence you. And that was just a kind of light bulb moment for me, that it's switched the kind of way I look at networking, rather than from a business owner's point of view. We go to networking, small business owners, large business, maybe even medium-sized business owners, maybe go to networking or send their staff out to networking to meet potential prospect clients. But when you look at it that way, it's almost like there's this way prospecting, and then there's this other way for almost like mentoring and finding people who can find you better connections for bigger, better things.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree. And no offense to the giant organizations that have built up over this idea that networking equals prospecting, and therefore you show up at these regular events and you trade leads and all of that sort of stuff. My experience has been what most small business owners and what most salespeople have probably learned, which is that those events usually only work out for 2 or 3 people in the room, and everyone else gets frustrated, right? Yeah. And what I would argue is that if you're just looking at networking for that reason, then maybe you should join that person who's quitting, because there are better ways to find clients in 2019. Yeah. But we know from the research that the people that you're around have a tremendous influence on your life. And so they're going to change the way you think about your business. They're going to give you ideas and grow you in ways that you wouldn't have if you're not adding to those connections. And so that's what Adam Rifkin, who is the gentleman we talk about in the book, really firmly believes, that that's the primary. I mean, the fundamental value that a network provides an individual is information, not sales leads or anything like that. It's information. The question is, what information do you want? If you just want leads on new customers or what have you, you're selling the network short, because there's a whole lot more information it can provide that'll grow you and benefit you over the long term. Yeah.
No, I think I grasped that other concept. I just never I never defined it as networking, I guess. Yeah. I got that point of like, I go to, as referring back to what we're discussing about shared events, shared activities. Workshops is a great example. I go to workshops to learn from my own education, and I end up coming back with some of like 4-day long workshops. I end up coming back with some of the best business relationships off the back of that.
Right. And you're there for a different reason, right?
Yeah.
And you're there, I mean, to some level when interdependence is required to achieve it, right? So you're at a workshop for sure, but there are activities that you're doing in that workshop that require you to meet those people, et cetera. Those make for better connections, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's in the book, we talk about organizations that have started to look at their training and development department, not as a source of just, here's the information we need to give to new hires, but as if we structure classes that are on a variety of different stuff, people will take those classes and will grow connections inside the organization that would have never happened otherwise, right? So there's learning is a tremendous shared activity. I think you got to be a little careful on who you're giving your money to on workshops, what have you. But most of us already have learned that lesson. And when you go to one that's run really well, it's powerful.
Yeah, definitely. And do you think, like, for example, on that, is you mentioned that you need to be deliberate about some things. So like, is thinking ahead of like where you're going to meet sort of high quality people who you want to get yourself around and be influenced by and connect with. Have you got any kind of strategies or approaches on that were maybe not in the book?
Yeah. I mean, so, and there's some that's in the book that are sort of
and in the book as well. Yeah.
I mean, the two things I think you need to look at are, most of the time, if you're trying to grow in an area, there's already one or two people in your life who are superstars in that area, right? Okay. I want to get in shape. I know exactly who of my friends are the fitness freaks that I need to hang out with a bit more, right? Yep. Most of us have that, whatever it is. Yes. And so some of it is just making an effort to spend a bigger amount of time with those people over time. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is you can get, like you said, deliberate, and you can start studying them and going, where do they go? My friend Pam Slim actually defines it as the watering holes, right? Like a watering hole on the African savannah that draws different animals. Okay, this is the type of people I want to meet more of. Where do they gather? And then I need to go to that event, right? I may not have even earned my way into that, but I need to make it a point to go to that event. So like in my own life, it's kind of funny. It didn't work out this way, but for the longest time, I thought that was the TED conference, right? I saw the people who were the authors and speakers and whatever that I wanted to be. They were attendees there, or they were sometimes speaking there, but more often than not, they were attendees there. And so I kind of thought, okay, this is where I need to go to begin to do that. I don't go there anymore since I've made those connections, and now there's other events that now I'm actually sort of backtracking my way into going, great, we got this sort of thinker thing, not down. There's people who are way better at it than me, but there's some back end elements of the business model that I need to learn. So now I spend most of my time at entrepreneurship conferences where small business owners and entrepreneurs that I respect are hanging out and learning from, because that's what I need to learn. Right. So that's a lot of what it is wherever it is you want to grow, there's people in your life that are already that, spend more time with them, but also figuring out what is their watering hole. What are the 2 or 3 events that they make sure to go to every year and get there?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, that's really interesting. And that on that, it was one of the questions that I was going to ask. I did see on your Friends of Friends book testimonials on the sort of case study page that you're connected with, for example, Daniel Pink and Cal Newport, who are very big, well-known authors in the business book world.
They're the ones who are doing way better than I am. Yeah, for sure.
And yourself, you're on that list. On that, I like your bookshelf in the background, by the way. It's looking
thanks. I was actually, when you were mentioning the testimonials, I was going to grab one because I don't remember who's on the back and who's inside and that sort of thing. Yeah,
well, like you've got impressive guys there, and I like maybe one question is how did you get them to write that for you? And the other question is how do you know them? And for example, if I wanted to know Cal Newport, or if I wanted to get Cal Newport or Daniel Pink on this podcast, I could ask you. And how would I approach you for the lesson for the viewers and for me? How would I approach you to ask to connect me with Daniel Pink, for example, to bring him on Ben's Business Podcast for an interview?
Yeah. So this is actually a great question because of the parallels, right? And so for those of you that are big fans of Ben, we're going to geek out here for a second. Okay. If you know my work, you already know this story. So I began my so what was interesting is Friend of a Friend really solidified why a lot of things that I tried early on in my career worked. So January 2010, I started a podcast. Now, if you think back to the world of technology, like remember, like the iPhone 3G had just come out, right? In fact, I don't even know if it was out yet. The iPhone itself was announced in 2007, right? So I don't even know if the second edition of the phone had come out yet. Nobody knew what a podcast was. There were like the HBR IdeaCast was out, and then that was it for like business podcasts. And so I started one because I knew how to record a conference call, and I knew how to upload an audio file via FTP, right? Which is what you needed to know how to do back in that day. There wasn't Anchor, there wasn't Facebook Live, there wasn't any of that stuff. And so that was my grand theory, that this is a technology that's so new that people don't even know how to measure success or failure. So I can use this technology to reach out to the people that I want to be like, and then invite them into creating content with me, which is what we did in an interview-based podcast show. I sent a lot of cold emails. Ironically, Dan was one that replied relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. But I sent a lot of cold emails, and a few people responded. And then we shared activity. We created this piece of content together. We had a great time. We would usually chat for an hour, even though it was only a 25-minute show. We would just chat afterwards and that sort of thing. Yeah. And then I would work the Friend of a Friend network after that. Hey, who else do you know that has books that are coming out soon or that you just think would be really good to follow up with on this topic of what have you? So a lot of times it was working that referral network. And then, I mean, how do you get them to endorse your book? That's really easy. Once you know them, you just ask, right? So that part's the easy part. The hard part is that. So there's two things in here to emphasize that are the tricks. So if you're watching this, the solution is not start a podcast, because now there's probably too many of them. Yep. What I like about what you're doing specifically is that you're doing it in different ways. The era of like, let's just call in on Skype and record a conversation and then I'll upload it through Anchor or SoundCloud or Libsyn. If you're just doing that, you're like 10,000 other people. So what's that little differentiating factor that you're playing around in a new space that's going to grow? People are going to gradually be interested. What's that early adopter thing that you can do? And again, that you're inviting people in to create a piece of content. So, a couple years ago, it seemed like the thing that was working better than podcasting was virtual summits. Now, video is so prevalent on so many platforms that seems to be the thing that's really working. So that was a lot of it. And if you look at all of this through the lens of Friend of a Friend, what is it? It's shared activities. I'm inviting you in to create something with me, which is a shared activity. Mm-hmm. And then it's the Friend of a Friend, the multiple degrees of separation out. Can I find a path? Now, the other thing too is that I never picked a specific person and said, oh, I've got to get them on my show, and then try and figure out who I can go beg an introduction to. Yeah. Instead, I took an open approach, which is a question that I talk about often in the book and in speeches, is this who do you know in blank question. My version of it for the podcast was who else would be a great person to talk to about this topic, which does a couple things. It gives me a list instead of one person usually. It gave me 2 or 3 names from that person that I just interviewed. The other thing is that all of those names tend to be people that person is comfortable introducing you to. Like, to give you a super nerdy example right here, you'd mentioned Cal Newport. I know that Cal is super productive of his time. So if you were to ask me who else would be a good person to talk to, he's actually not going to be on my list of people to name to you for that reason, right? I don't know that I would want to make an introduction because he's super productive of his time. So I wouldn't mention. I
know what you mean. Yeah.
So when you ask it that way, you get people that are willing, that you get names that people are willing to make that introduction to. So everything else just happens naturally after that. Cal, by the way, just is super. I think this is awesome. I think he still has it. It's like interesting at whatever his domain is. If you think you've got an interesting proposition for him, and then if he also thinks it's interesting, he'll email you back. It's sort of the 2019 version of Bill Murray, the actor, and the phone. Bill literally just has a 1-800 number that's connected to an answering machine. And if you want to get a hold of him, that you got to call and leave a message. And if he's interested, he'll call you back.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I like that. Yeah. So yeah, I know what you mean. You don't have a list of people you must have on the podcast. It's just kind of an open approach to picking a topic of what the podcast is about.
Yeah.
And then, as you're saying, taking the other angles. Like I was trying to insist that we did this on Facebook Live because of the different approach that I get. Like we get the vibe and live questions.
It's a new and unique medium, so it's something a little bit different than that standard. Nowadays podcasting is sort of like a garage band. Everybody has one now, right? Doing it via video, doing it via that technology, it's a very differentiating factor. So there's not just advice for you, by the way, for anyone that's watching. I think that's the question you want to ask, is not just how do we plan this shared activity, but how do we find a shared activity that is sort of still has that shiny new factor on it, so that there's a lot of intrigue to it. And that invites people into the experience of doing that, right? The first time I ever did Facebook Live, I just want to know how it works. So I said, it's like, right? So I would be on the lookout for those and learn kind of a lot about that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So like I do think this approach as well, like although you have to get a unique angle on if you are going to start a podcast to develop your network, because it is a great way to spend an hour with someone that you admire, that you can learn from, who has wisdom, and it's a great way to learn yourself while also contributing value to people the viewers who are watching. So there's and you're also getting value from this as well, David, because we're talking about your book, and we're making Ben's Business Book Club, which is a group of 1,000 members of avid business book readers, aware of your book. So you're getting value, I'm getting value, the viewers are getting value. So it's a big value circle that I see going around. So it's a great thing to do. But I 100% agree. Everyone has a podcast, and you have to be different.
Right, because otherwise it's not really a shared activity anymore. It's just a routine thing that we do. Right.
Yeah.
And this is not to knock on audio. Like I've got Dan Schwabel is a good friend of mine that just started an audio interview based podcast. You'd think there's too many of them, but he's got a unique format. He calls it 5 questions, and you tune in. It's 5 questions with the person. So it's a quick interview, but you also kind of tune in because you want to know what 5 questions he's going to ask. Right. Like it's not the same 5 questions every time.
Yeah.
So you're sort of, you're listening because you want to hear the person's answers, but you also want to know, like, why did Dan pick those questions and what have you? Yeah. It's another unique format. Other people have started playing around with daily, right? There's a bunch of different things you can do, but it's got to be differentiated. Otherwise, it's really not going to leverage that shared activities thing.
Yeah. And I listened to you and Dan Pink's interview as well. And I was listening in for questions, because one of the things I want to avoid with this podcast as well is that I'm not going and listening to, or I'm not asking the same questions as every other host has asked you. So I wanted to see what your answers were, and maybe take a wee bit extra from that and go a bit further, and maybe take a different approach on like the types of questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, love it. Love it.
So yeah, I see the benefits massively from workshops, and like that's how I see these shared activities. I really like that idea. I've also started a thing called you've maybe read The One Thing by Gary Keller, and he talked about how to start a habit, the 60-60 challenge. And it is effective because you get a bit of momentum from ticking those boxes. And I did watch your recent video about your, like, it doesn't take 21 days. It actually takes a lot longer than 21 days to create a habit. I think 66 days is quite good, and especially when you have to rip up the sheet and start again. So that group, I created a WhatsApp group to add accountability and sort of public commitment to it. And we've got 10 people in a WhatsApp group, plus the 66-day challenge sheet from The One Thing. Plus we have to take a selfie every morning. So there's a bunch of things that we have incorporated to make all these kind of influential factors to make it work. I'm waking up at 4:45 a.m. But that's a really good example. The community that's been built in that group and business that's happened off of that, when it was really the focus was to wake up at 4:45 a.m. every morning for 66 days, which hasn't taken 66 days because lots of people have failed. So we're now in this like sort of lifetime WhatsApp group, but they're they're all people I really wanted to bring into the group that I was inspired by, and I picked the kind of group, if you know what I mean. But some people dropped out. Some people couldn't do it because their wife was pregnant or something like that, so they had to change it. But in that group of 10 people, I can see exactly what you're talking about. Just to back up on that point, that it's really true that business happens off of these personal relationships.
Yeah. Oh no, totally. And you know, the fancy network science term is called multiplexity. When you have multiple different contexts for connection to someone, if it's a business only context, that's a uniplex tie. If there's multiple different scenarios or multiple different things that you have in common, that's a multiplex tie. And you build a deeper relationship faster with somebody when you pursue that multiplexity. But you also, the research is pretty clear that the directional arrow goes from personal to business, not business to personal. It goes both ways, but it's much more likely that personal connections, people that you would put in the friends bucket, end up helping you or helping people that you would put in the work bucket. And so what I advise a lot of people is it's not worth having those buckets anymore. It's all just one network, some of which has multiplex ties and some of which doesn't. But the goal should be to build out those multiplex ties with everybody. It's not, despite what mobster movies from 20 years ago say, there's no such thing as it's not personal, it's just business. It's all personal and it's all business.
Yeah, it's a good point. So I kind of got the gist of what the aim of networking should be. Could you just elaborate on that slightly? Just what the aim of networking should be?
I mean, what I would say is that if you're defining networking as meeting strangers, you've got a really narrow definition. It's not helping you, right? And you're not there anymore, which is great. Yeah. My definition is that networking is anything you're doing that helps you understand the existing network that's already around you. You're already embedded inside a network. You may want to grow new connections, but they're somewhere else in that network too. They might be 1 degree or 2 degrees of separation out from you. Finding a path to them counts as networking, but even just the things that you're doing that give you a sense of here's who's connected to whom in my life, understanding that network that's around you and strengthening the network around you, that also counts as networking. And it just so happens those activities tend to have a better ROI than that whole meeting strangers thing anyway.
Right. Yeah. That's a good point. So you exist inside a network. I like how you say that as well. How we've got these quotes and sayings of you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Your net worth is your network is your net worth. But that's the misconception. That's like the way that we've learned what networking is like your network, but you don't have a network. You exist inside one.
Yeah, no, that's something. Yeah, and that's something I say often at the risk of dragging it in from other podcast shows. I'm sure you've heard me say it. Is that I think one of the biggest problems is that people give advice around this idea of how do you build your network, and I get what we mean. We mean just how do you grow the number of people you're connected to, but that's the wrong approach because you're like, I hate to break this to everyone watching. You're not the center of the universe, right? It's not about your network and building your network. You exist inside of one. There is one broad network, 7.4 billion people strong and counting. And as soon as we end up on other planets or interact with extraterrestrials, it'll be way bigger than that. Yeah. But for now, it's 7.4 billion people. And you may not like the little neighborhood of that broad network that you're in, and you may want to change neighborhoods. That's totally fine. But you've got to respect that the network already exists. And your goal is to create value to it and navigate through it, not to build your network because you can't. Yeah. It's just not how it works.
Yeah. Do you think you should move home if you're not happy with your network?
Do you think you should move home?
Or move location, like move to another town? Or do you think that the sort of social impact of being in an area of people who influence you because of that idea that you said in another podcast, your friends can make you fat. Elaborate on that, and also the question of because of that, if your friends affecting you or influencing you through like osmosis, then should we get way away from that?
Yeah, well, it's evidence for why you should be more deliberate about who you're interacting with, right? So the study that we're referring to, for those of you that are like, what the is, 2 researchers, Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, are preeminent network scientists, and one of the amazing phenomenons that they discovered was what they call the 3 degrees of influence. That when you look at a community, you look at a network, it turns out there's various elements of it that have an effect on you, even if you don't know that person. So, we all know you're the average of the 5 people thing, but it turns out that it's not just the people that are 1 degree of separation out. It's not just your friends, it's their friends. Because their friends are influencing them and then they're influencing you, there's a spillover effect. And their friend of a friend, out to 3 degrees of separation, you see this impact. And what this means is that it's not enough to, again, grow your network and grow out the list of contacts that you have to pay attention to who those people are interacting with too. So remember I was saying earlier, who are those few people that are excelling in that area of life that you want to interact with? And then you want to know, okay, who's influencing those people? Yep. And what you may find is let's say there's 5 people that are really excelling in an area you want to get better in. 3 of those people are interacting with people that are leveled up on them, and 2 others are really sort of successful despite the community that's around them. Well, now you've got that broader view. So it's sort of, it's the advice that every parent of a middle schooler, high schooler gives, right? You're watching who your kid is interacting with because you know that those people are going to influence them. Same thing with your friends and who you're interacting with. It's not enough just to interact with them. You also want to know what community they're embedded in and whether or not you want to be a part of that community. To the broader question about picking up and moving, it's sort of the nuclear bomb approach, right? Of just destroy everything and start again. Yeah. I don't think you need to do that. I think you just need to audit who you're spending your time with and understand the correlation between that and the results that you're getting in that area of life. And then choose new friends, or the 2 or 3 people that are positively influencing you. Make sure you're spending a disproportionate amount more time of that. I mean, odds are if you live the way humanity is right now with populations, if you live near a community, I don't want to use the term city, but a community that is greater than maybe 250,000 people, which is a number I just picked out of the air, right? 250,000 people. Odds are that community has enough diversity in it that you will find a little group that is what you're looking for. That little group may take you to a bigger city and a bigger community, but I don't think you've got to just disappear and land somewhere else and start over. I think you can work through your existing network, get to the communities that you want to interact with. Yeah.
It crossed my mind, like where you live definitely does have an impact. And is one approach potentially moving to another town?
Yeah, I mean,
more positive and whatever.
So yes, I was literally actually just talking to somebody about this yesterday. I think one thing that little kind of weirds me out in 2019 is we have this tendency to assume that sort of bigger is better. Like I was listening to this guy who has a book that's actually pretty good, and one of his pieces of advice for people for life is get yourself to a city. And by city, he means mega city. He means New York, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, London, Singapore, right? Beijing, whatever. He means big cities. And I don't know that that's true. Everywhere that you choose to live has strengths and weaknesses. I mean, I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which I'm sure you've never heard of, which is fine. Right? It's a city of just under 1 million people. It is the 47th largest city by population in America. And what I love about it is that it's big enough to have everything that I want, but it's also small enough to allow me to focus. And that's something that I don't think you get when you choose to jump into that big city, because now there's so many people to interact with that you never actually get any quiet, right?
Yeah.
So everything has those strengths and weaknesses. So when it comes to sort of where do you want to live, you have to take all of that into consideration. Here's what I get out of it, and here's what I lose. Now, one of the things that I know because I live in that small city is that I'm not connected to that. So I use the money I save on cost of living to get myself to various different big cities and big conferences throughout the year, because I know I need those connections. But I would rather do that on a quarterly or every 6-month basis and spend the rest of my time doing work.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah. So nuclear bomb approach. I like that. I wrote that one down. So yeah, you don't need, there's a saying I always say, like, you can like change your name, you can move town, but you take yourself with you as well. Like that's the other thing that happens as well. If you just think, oh, I need to go, because it's probably, like you're saying, a lack of resourcefulness by not making use of the resources and the people that are actually not like that sounds like you're not making use of people, but you know what I mean. You're actually not making use of your city, your town.
You take your habits with you, and if you move to a different place and you fall back into those same habits and same communities, it's gonna suck.
Yeah.
I think it's easier to change your community in your existing place than it is to change a whole geography and then also try and change a new community. That just doesn't. I mean, despite like the movies of the headstrong, plucky female that moves to New York to start to work in magazines, like despite all of those plots of all of those movies, that's not really how personal change works most of the time. Most of the time, it's staying where you are geographically and just choosing to spend a disproportionate more amount of time with the people who are winning. And over time, your habits change as well.
Going back to something you said, like who's inspiring them. So if, like, for example, someone who's fit that you know, but they don't necessarily have any other great habits, if that makes sense. So they're alcoholics, but they're super fit at the same time, which doesn't make sense. But that's their lifestyle, and they're like, so if you've got like that kind of, you want to develop like your health. Maybe that's a bad example, but if you want to develop your fitness and that you know someone that's super fit, and then looking at who's inspiring them, there's a problem that kind of came up that like maybe an objection to that idea that they might just be getting their information from the internet these days in like 2019. We don't necessarily, like, I don't know, it's just a thought that potentially people read books, they've got videos online, and they can get a lot of that information from without having people around. But I wondered what your opinion was on that, if they will definitely have a group of people that they maybe see weekly or whatever.
Yeah, so that's possible. It's just not likely. Like when you look at human behavior and you look at the psychology research, I mean, specifically, if I'm going to get super nerdy here, if someone is surrounded by obese people and yet they're able to keep habits of super fitness, then they would have to score abnormally high on what's known as conscientiousness as a personality trait. That most of us, they would have to score at a level that most of us don't. Now, they may still be surrounded in day-to-day life by, obese people and alcoholics, but they're in an online community of people that they're interacting with. Like I think about my own writing and speaking community. Most of it is actually communication that happens online. I don't know. I do know there are 2 other people in the city that I live in that have had a modicum of success in the nonfiction book space, and that's it, right? So there are way more people in that online community, but that's still a community, right? And we're still making efforts to interact with each other every 3 months, every 6 months, etc. It's sort of like your WhatsApp group that's checking in at 4:45 every morning with a selfie, right? But it's still joining a community. That tends to be how human nature works. So it might not be a physical community that's meeting every single day, like, to use this fitness thing, this like a CrossFit box or something like that. But it's still a community that you're being a part of. It just might be an online one as opposed to an in-person.
Okay. And how do you find out their online communities? Like, I guess like I do talk about my WhatsApp group, but do you think that everyone shares the online communities they're part of, or?
Yeah. So I'm part of a community of about 500 people that make the majority of the revenue from speaking, right?
Okay.
How did I join that community? Someone I admire who does a lot of speaking told me about it.
Okay.
Right? And that's still, even in 2019 with search engine optimization of whatever, that's still how most people find out, right? So yeah, you can run around and Google on a lot of stuff, but odds are, if you're looking for where those communities are, you go ask the people doing what you do, how they do it, how they get advice, where they go, and then you go there. In the case of this group, and I don't want to name it because then everyone's going to search it and try and join it.
Tell me when we stop recording.
There you go. In the case of this group, like, I went looking for people who were succeeding in that area because I wanted to learn more about that area. And after 2 or 3 of them all named the same group, one of them offered to invite me into it, and that's how I got into it. So that's still how you find out most of the time, which is why I was emphasizing that point earlier about find those people that are winning in that area of life and then ask, where are they going? What communities are they a part of? You may not be able to join it right away, but even if you just know what it is, you know, I knew about the TED conference for 10 years before I ever got the money and got the invitation to go attend it, right? But I knew what it was, and it was on my radar as a community that I should probably be a part of.
Okay.
Right. So, yeah, we're not all that different, even in 2019 from ourselves prior. We get our information from the people that are around us. The question is, if you want better information, you got to go find better people.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You kind of have to evolve to, if you, for example, want to get involved with the TED community, you would have had to maybe had that on your radar, but we have to evolve as a person before we are basically confident and ready to be accepted by that community as well, in a way.
Yes. I think the desire to change, to evolve, comes first, and then the people come second, and then those people help you change until you're a broader part of the community, right? So I still don't think it's run off by yourself and try and make, I mean, you know this, if you didn't have 9 other people to check in with, would you wake up at 4:45 every morning? Probably not, right?
Not consistently, no.
So that desire does come first, but the community is a close second, and then they're the ones that help you get to that level. And by the way, like, to pick on TED, there's concentric circles inside of concentric circles and communities inside of communities. So one of the things you learn is like, oh, I'm good enough now to get an invitation to go. There's still more work to do, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing in any other field. If it's entrepreneurship and small business, right? You might, oh, I finally qualify for Entrepreneurs Organization or for YPO or something like that. Like, oh, great, I finally qualify. Well, there's still the next thing. Like, we're always evolving.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's always a community to evolve into, and I think community drives that change more than change invites you into the new community.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like life goes on. Like, even when you have a success, life goes on, and you have to pick yourself up and continue.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got a question here. The dormant ties, for example, like how do we build a better connection with those dormant ties? I know that you've probably been asked this many times, but I'll use a bit of context as well on that to make it take a different approach. So Ben's Business Book Club, I've got 1,200 members in there. Lots of them know me through me building goodwill, putting content out, doing podcasts, and creating a community for them to all interact with each other. How do I build a connection with these 1,200 members, for example? Or they're kind of like connections, they're friends on Facebook, but that's all they are. And then there's some people I've got closer with through doing just chats with them like this.
Yeah. So to recap, for those that are watching, a dormant tie is you have strong ties and weak ties. People that you are closely connected within, your best friends are your strong ties. The rest are sort of weak ties, and there's various stages of weak ties. Dormant ties specifically are people that you knew and maybe even knew really well, but then the relationship fell by the wayside. You haven't talked to them a lot. So one of the things that implies to me is that I like to think about the strength of a relationship as an interval of time between conversations. There are people that you talk to every single day. There are people you talk to once a week, once a month, once every 3 months, once every 4 months, once a year, once only every couple of years, once maybe you'll never talk to them again, right? If you think about relationships, those intervals of time, what I love about that way to do it is that it doesn't mean any relationship is unimportant. They're all important. What it means is how can we create value by checking in with each other on that sort of regular basis? And so what I advise people is, the question isn't necessarily how you build up dormant ties. It's what's the right interval of time to be checking in with that person. And then how do I build a system that checks in with that person? And for me, it started as using a couple different tools and technologies. There's a service it's a paid service that I love, even though I endorse it, but they still charge me. So I love it, right? I'm not just a paid endorser, called Contactually that does that. There's another service called Levitate. Some people use followup.cc. There's a bunch of things you can do to set reminders of when you're supposed to interact with this bigger group of people called your dormant ties. So that's the way that I think about it. I will say, what I love about your question is that you were talking about, online versus face-to-face conversations, what have you. I don't count any online interactions as a real check-in, right? The fact that I liked your post didn't mean that you even remembered. So it doesn't count as that sort of real check-in. So I'm looking at text message conversations, phone calls, face-to-face conversations, Zoom calls, maybe private messages through social media, but anywhere there's sort of that deeper, almost synchronous or synchronous conversation, that's what I count. Mm-hmm. And that's the big thing. So I started with a lot of those deliberate services that would remind me to follow up with people.
Okay.
What I found is that if you start to build a habit where you're actually taking the 15 to 30 seconds every time someone pops into your head to send them a message and say, hey, I was thinking about you today, I hope you're well. Or you read an article and it reminds you of somebody, so you take the 15 seconds to forward them that article. Over time, that service doesn't remind me that I need to follow up with anybody anymore. If somebody falls by the wayside, it will, so I keep paying for it. But that regular habit is the bigger deal. I think the amazing thing about our phone is that it allows us to be distracted whenever we're bored. That's the wrong use of it. I think the amazing thing about it is that when someone pops into your head, you can fire off a message. You don't have to remember. You don't have to say like, oh, I got to remember that when I get back to my computer, or oh, I got to remember that when I get home so I can write a postcard to them, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You can literally stop in your tracks, pull it out and send them a text message. Go, hey, I was thinking about you. Hope you're well.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, and something that people that are listening and myself can just take away and use today. It's not something you don't need a tool to do that. You can actually start that straight after this.
Agreed. I mean, I would, that's usually my biggest habit to tell people is I would start picking somebody. And if you want, go through like your Facebook and look, if you pick up your contacts, it'll sort it by who you frequently interact with. Pick the person at the very bottom, the person you haven't talked to forever. And if you can think of nothing else to say, just say what I was saying earlier. I was thinking about you today and I hope you're well. No reply needed. They'll probably reply and then you'll get into a catch-up conversation.
Yeah.
But I think we put a lot of pressure on us that we need some immediate thing that creates, tremendous amount of value. So we wait for that article or we wait to hear good news for them to send in congratulations. I've never met a human that doesn't like knowing that somebody else was thinking about them and just wanted to send them some good thoughts.
Yeah.
I've never met a human that's like, no, screw you, get out of my life, right? So that simple message is actually incredibly powerful, and it's a great one to use when you're like, I know I need to reach back out to this person, and I have no agenda, but I also have no idea what to say because I have no agenda.
Yeah. And even when you take that simple 15-second action, I guess when you get into Messenger and you start typing, and then you actually start to think, because your intuitive mind starts to go, what's obvious about like this person is, and then you just write it in as you're doing that kind of checking in with them.
Yeah, or what happens a lot of times is you send that simple message, hey, I was thinking about you today, I hope you're well. They'll write back with what they're up to, right? And then you just start asking questions, and eventually you'll find some deeper thing that you guys need to have a conversation about, right? That's the value, or what Mark Granovetter, the network scientist, calls the strength of weak ties.
Yes.
So you could just do it with that message and then asking a bunch of questions. You don't have to go in, but I think we put the cart before the horse sometime and think like, oh, I've got to have this amazing reason. And that's the reason, quite frankly, that the only people that ever follow up with weak and dormant ties are people that are trying to sell you something, and why we all hate this idea. I think if we just made a point to check back frequently and just send well wishes, this whole thing would work a lot better.
Yeah, it's really good. It's reminds me of taking marketing to the sort of one-to-one sales, not in a salesy way, but it's taking this casting the net of sending a newsletter to your list or posting on Facebook, which is to your followers. That's just the casting of the net. But then when you go to directly into Messenger, type in someone's name, send them a message related to them potentially, that's how you build real connections over time.
Precisely.
Yeah. I like that. So that is kind of where I was going with this, is like, there's this idea of like podcasts and building goodwill and giving people like this free, valuable content. And that builds goodwill with our audience. So they appreciate us for putting this content out there. And then what ends up happening is you make an offer. You tell them about your book, or that you're doing a talk or running a workshop, and they end up going because they've received a lot of value, and you're just reminding them about you as well. And that's what marketing is reminding them about you, is keeping their attention, and then making them an offer every so often. But just going direct and contacting these people like one-to-one is just such an important extra step. It's been extraordinary when everyone else has just been like doing it the ordinary way.
Yeah. No, I agree with it. Not a lot of people have that system in place, which is why we even have to talk about how do you get over the awkwardness of reaching back out to someone you haven't talked to in a while.
Yeah.
Well, why is it awkward? Well, it's awkward because you're not doing it on a regular basis to begin with.
Right. Yeah. So that's a really good point, because the worst thing you can do is go to a ton of networking events, which I've done. I've made this mistake, so it's coming from experience. It's going to a ton of networking events at the beginning of my business career as I was starting up, like what probably the majority of business owners do, that are kind of unsure where they're going with their business, and then not doing the follow-up. And then after even doing the follow-up, continuing that continuous interaction with people. Because you can have a bunch of business cards and that met as many people. They might remember your face, but they don't have any connection with you anymore if you've left it a year or even 6 months.
Precisely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think there's plenty of questions I have for you, probably more so as it usually happens than when I begun this kind of chat. But a couple other things where, like, I know you're big on reading. I was following your kind of read with Burkus on Twitter, just seeing what books you were reading. And have you got any book recommendations for the people watching or listening? Like, what's your favorite business book, or what's your favorite business book, and what's your favorite personal development book?
Yeah, I'll answer both with the same one. Super esoteric read that not a lot of people have heard about. There's a book called The Opposable Mind by Roger Martin. Roger's an intellectual hero of mine. He's a brilliant guy. And the book is about how do you look at existing business models that seem contradictory and merge them, or existing strategies that seem contradictory and merge them. Like, can you be low cost but also be high touch, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
And the book is a profile of companies and leaders that have done that. And I think it's phenomenal for that reason. It's one you really have to chew on, and so I think that's probably why it didn't do very well in the market. But it's got really long legs in terms of it. It may not have sold a ton when it first came out, but it continues to sell, right? Because it really makes you think. And so I like that one. I try and reread that one every couple of years, as well as there's a lot of derivative works from that Roger's put out that I stay in touch with. But that would be the one that I would tell a lot of people to start with. To our point earlier about, like, this is why I'm thinking about this in terms of a show or a podcast as a way to build an audience, what have you, is that model's been taken. How do I combine that with some other model, right? There's a lot of value that you can unpack in that. So The Opposable Mind by Roger Martin, definitely be my one.
What's the author's name?
Roger Martin.
Roger Martin.
He was dean at the University of Toronto's business school for a long time. Now he's just a thinker, speaker, all around amazing guy.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anyone else, speakers, thinkers, that inspire you? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I've been, and you know this from other podcast episodes, I've always been unashamed to admit that my sort of role model is Daniel Pink. I think he's the right blend of talking about research and also being willing to be prescriptive. I think way too many people are overly prescriptive and just say, here's what you should do. And then there's too many people that are just, here's a bunch of interesting research. And Dan kind of hits that middle, and that's sort of what I'm going for too. So if you liked anything about this interview, you should check his work out as well.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I've read, what's the book called? It's Not to Sell As Human. It's his other book about autonomy. It was like one of the Drive. Yeah. Drive. Yeah, that's a really good one.
It's a great read. His new one, When, is fantastic as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I've not read that one yet, so I definitely need to return to that first one I read, Drive, because it was quite intense for me for one of my first sort of businessy books.
Yeah.
So I think I'll return back to that with a new perspective. The other thing is, well, you kind of, yeah. So like, how do we become a connector? Like, because I heard you mention in a podcast that networking is also about connecting, like connecting other people.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about a bunch of different ideas around this. How do you be a connector? The biggest thing I can tell you, we already sort of hit on, which is this idea that it's not about how many connections you have. It's about taking responsibility for the network that's already around you, providing value for that. So we talked about Adam Rifkin earlier, who became sort of the world's greatest networker by building communities of people in that software space that that his goal was just get them all interconnected to each other. That led to value for him, but that wasn't the goal. The goal was taking care of the network first.
Right. Okay. And what is the value for us? Like, I know that it's a given thing of connecting people, giving them tips and giving them kind of sort of just being a good human being and like staying in touch with people. But from a rational business point of view, if you were to tell someone to become a connector for networking and they didn't really get the point of that, like, for example, what's the value for us to grow our business by becoming a connector or taking that approach to networking?
Yeah. So and the reason it worked for Adam Rifkin, there's a phenomenon in network science known as preferential attachment, which is this idea that the more connections you have, or the more generous you are with your existing connections, the more new connections come to you. Remember what we said at the top, that the purpose of a network is to provide you with information that you can act on to sell more, information you can act on to improve yourself, whatever it is. And so what preferential attachment basically says is that as you become known as this connector, it gets to a point where those connections find you. You think about that person you were telling me earlier about in the interview that is focused on never going to a networking event, et cetera. That's because whoever he or she is, the preferential attachment is at work in such a way that there are connections, new connections to be met coming at them just naturally, right? Preferential, it's sort of good news, bad news, right? It's bad news because it means that, yes, networking comes easier to some people. But it's good news because it means that every action you have in serving the network also builds momentum towards becoming this passive system that's delivering new information.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great answer. Yeah. So just wrapping up everything, how would you summarize this whole sort of chat interview in one sentence?
Oh, I got to summarize the whole interview in one sentence. I would say, again, it's not about you and it's not about the people that you know. It's about the network that you exist in. And so take stock of that, be deliberate about who you're spending your time with in that network, and know where in that network you need to go so that when the opportunity is to make that jump appear, you're ready. You can't grow your network, build your network, et cetera. You just exist inside of a network, and your role as a citizen of that network will affect your eventual success from that network.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Thanks a lot for joining me, David. I'm sorry about all the technical issues we both had to put up with, but we got there in the end, and this is recorded. No technical issues, so I'm going to end it while we're on a high.
Yeah. We should get out of here before everything crashes on us.
Yeah. But it was great to learn more about you and virtually meet you.
Yeah. You as well. Thank you again so much for having me on.
Yeah. Thanks for your time. Cheers.